about to undergo. Bless every panelist, bless every speaker, bless our illustrious DR. Let everything be to the edification of your body, your Omega Psi Phi fraternity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Edwin.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Mighty Sixth District, I'm Brother Kurt Walker, the 42nd District Representative, and I would like to welcome you to our month-long engagement series. And tonight, we are going to be dealing with the economic impact on the township, a town hall forum hosted by Brother Rick Wade. Again, we want to welcome you, and we have a plethora of events. We started off the month with the Honorable Congressman James E. Clyburn, and then we followed up with a town hall meeting with the president of the North Carolina NAACP, Brother Dr. T. Anthony Spearman, and the president of the South Carolina NAACP, Ms. Brenda C. Murphy. Tonight, we're engaging several panelists with a very spirited conversation, and we hope it will be an informative and uplifting one. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Brother Rick Wade, Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Brother Rick Wade.
Thank you, Brother DR, and all of the brothers who are part of this town hall and other guests. Thank you for joining us this evening. You know, some 57 years ago, over 250,000 Americans convened here in Washington, D.C. for that historic March on Washington, punctuated by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Often overlooked in that speech, over a century later, the full name was actually the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, with a very heavy focus on closing the stark gap in unemployment and creating employment opportunity and prosperity and economic opportunity between white and Black Americans. And oftentimes we miss that. But the reality is that half century later, while we have made some progress, that stark gap still remains. And the work to close it is urgent and more important now than ever. You know the facts still today. The opportunity to gain an education, to secure a job, to start a business or provide for your family is still determined often by the color of your skin. For decades, Black unemployment rates have been consistently twice as high as white unemployment rates. Black students are twice as likely to attend high poverty schools than their white peers. And Black business owners still struggle to access capital for their business ventures. And additionally, Black Americans are more likely than whites to be arrested, to be convicted, and to be sentenced, making it even more difficult and sometimes impossible to re-enter the job market and build a new and better life. One of my partners through the U.S. Chambers, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and one of his most exciting and fascinating research reports is called The Business Case for Racial Equity. And in that report, it basically says that if we address the racial inequalities that exist in our society, our GDP grows by some $8 trillion. And the Kellogg report is spot on when it says that we got to know that these persistent racial disparities that we see today, they did not happen by accident. They arose from a long history of deliberate policies based on race and have been perpetuated by biases that still remain today. So systemic inequalities hurt individuals and communities, our economy, our entire society. We just released a report at the U.S. Chamber in partnership with MetLife that found that Black businesses, minority-owned businesses, have been hit disproportionately hard in recent months as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some 66% of Black businesses across the country are concerned about permanently closing, and that is absolutely unconscionable, as these businesses, as you know, are not just businesses, but they're anchors in our local communities. So this pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, all of the corresponding economic challenges that we see today have thrust these issues into the national spotlight. And the country is now at a turning point. And it's time for policy leaders and elected officials and everyone, business leaders included, to capitalize on this momentum and enact real change to ensure that enduring inequalities of opportunity, rooted in racial bias remains a thing of the past. So more than a half century ago, as I mentioned, Americans marched on the promise of equal opportunity for good jobs, economic mobility, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And it's on all of us as brothers and people of goodwill in America, the private and public sectors, to finally deliver on that promise that echoed through the streets of Washington back in 1963. We got to seize this moment and this momentum. We say it feels different, but we got to make it different and help close the longstanding opportunity gaps for Black Americans and Black communities. Equality of opportunity simply cannot wait another 50 years. I'm excited to be joined this evening by a distinguished group of brothers and on a panel to discuss business as a pathway, Black business in America as a pathway to economic empowerment and prosperity. Let me introduce our panel, and we look forward to having a spirited conversation about how we address challenges facing Black Americans with regards to Black business and close these inequalities with regards to business and economy. We're joined by David Henson, who is a Senior Vice President of Integra Capital Management. David is the former National Director of the Minority Business Development Agency, the only agency in federal government whose singular focus is addressing issues of concern to minority businesses across the country. Marlon Kimpson. Brother Marlon Kimpson is a distinguished senator from the state of South Carolina, also a very successful attorney at the firm of Motley Rice in Charleston, South Carolina. Brother Farad Ali is President and Chief Executive Officer of Associa LLC. He's also the former Vice President of the National Minority Supplier Development Council, which works to connect Black and other minority firms to corporate and other supply chains. Let me start this evening, David, if you will unmute, and others. Tell us about, one, your role at Integra Capital Management, but also your role as head of all the minority businesses through MBDA. What do you see on the landscape in terms of challenges, but yet opportunities facing Black businesses in America?
Well, thank you, Rick, for that question. And I am just delighted to be with such a distinguished group of panelists. And I thank all of you who are listening in to this very important webinar. At Integra Capital Management, I run their business consulting and executive development program, where I really focus my time and attention on engaging business owners, wealthy families, and executives on providing global investment strategies and programs. When it comes to looking at minority-owned businesses, particularly African-American-owned businesses during this particular time, it's an incredibly challenging time. As you've heard many times before, the biggest issue that minority-owned businesses face today is access to capital. In fact, there was a recent study that said that the need for capital is so great during this period of COVID-19, and the lack of capital has been so extensive that between February and April of 2020, 41% of African-American owned businesses went out of business. That's a staggering number. And if COVID-19 goes late into 2020, which some people think it will, there's a possibility we can lose, upwards of 80% of Black-owned businesses. Now, in the midst of all of that, the challenge, there are substantial opportunities. And some of these opportunities exist simply because of the COVID-19 situation. So let me lay out a couple of opportunities that exist within this difficult period. One is, for many of these businesses that survive, there will be less competition. So when you think about the competitive environment as a factor that influences your opportunity, there will be less competition simply because there'll be fewer businesses that will be operating. The stronger businesses will have an opportunity to acquire other businesses, other maybe weaker businesses, or certainly grow through acquisition. And I think you can, Farad Ali, who has purchased a company, could speak to that in great detail. There's going to be an opportunity to reduce costs through technology. Technology continues to permeate the business community, and the level of technology that's out here is not completely integrated throughout the entire business community. So there'll be opportunities for cost reduction as a result of technology. And one of the more interesting opportunities that I've seen recently in my discussions are the number of majority-owned businesses, large corporations, or middle market companies that are interested in engaging Black-owned businesses as a part of their supply chain or as JV partners. That's an opportunity that prior to the death of George Floyd, no one was thinking about, but there's an increased tempo in the recognition of the value of engaging minority-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, the value of diversity and inclusion. And so focusing on relationships, focusing on the opportunities there is another chance for these businesses to grow much more rapidly coming out of COVID-19.
Good. Yeah. Thanks, David. Farad, if you would unmute, I want to come to you because David, one, referenced you, brother Farad Ali, and one of the things that I talk about often is reimagining. We have to reimagine ourselves as Black businesses, and part of that imagination, how do we acquire? What are the new joint ventures that we can create to position us to be more competitive in this economy? You just did that. You just acquired a business in particularly during this difficult time. One, what inspired you to be an entrepreneur? And tell us how that acquisition actually came about.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, brothers and guests, and we thank you all for participating in this session. And I'd like to thank the 6th District for just really focusing on this issue of economic empowerment. One of the things that we recognize in our country is a lot of the issues around social justice that we're fighting now about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and we could name so many people, even some in our family that have met up with the system and had adverse outcomes, is that social justice without economic justice is really no justice. The world was built on the backs of slaves 400 years ago, and we saw that even as they orchestrated that, they allowed for businesses to thrive. If they were cattlemen or if whatever they did in farming, and as they built industry and these things that started to happen. What I've learned now early in my life when I was growing up is that entrepreneurs provided a way for people to build wealth. We recognize that if you want to build wealth in our country, there's really 2 ways to do it. Well, 3, inheritance, which really hit us well when we started having large insurance companies like North Carolina Mutual and other ones, the one in Alabama. 2 is housing. Housing has been the second place where we as a people could make wealth, but we know we lost so much of our wealth in 2008 with the housing crunch. So that started to adversely affect us. And then 3 is business. So those are the 3 ways that you can really start developing and building wealth so that you can leave a legacy from behind. So my interest for many years, I've been an elected official. I've also worked in nonprofits. I've worked for a for-profit. I was a banker for over 10 years. I got a chance to be exposed to watching people be wealthy and how they were able to get to be wealthy. And I've recognized that a lot of it was through not just the capital that David Henson is talking about, but also through their networks. So the social networks mean a whole lot. And their relationships are really how they build opportunity. I'm a big proponent. You could tell someone's net worth by their network. And their network really helps you to determine this. And so when I started looking at some of the statistics and then realizing why it was important for me to really start building out a business opportunity, I was listening to a friend of mine, Ron Busby at the U.S. Black Chamber, and we were talking around how over 320 million people live in America. And out of that number, 18 million of them are white millionaires. And what was more shocking to me is in today's society, this is 2019 stats, only 35,000 Black millionaires. So when you stop and think about that. We don't even have 1,000 millionaires per state. And that starts to really start thinking around how do we need to start building our economic space so we can start building our political space and we can start building things so we can have our congressmen not have to worry about fundraising. We don't have to worry about them being intimidated when they have to make votes, but we can support the people that want to support our issues. So economic justice matters when we're trying to look for social justice. And so my intent in trying to be a partner inside of an organization of scale was to say, we get a chance to influence hiring people. We get a chance to also provide, we provide backpacks. We can do philanthropy for our community, and we can also start building wealth. So I would tell you, Brother Wade, the whole intent of that was to try to start participating in wealth creation for the Black community.
Good. Thank you, bro. You talked about the network, and when we think about Black business opportunity and this whole broader issue of economic opportunity, it doesn't begin and just end business owners and business leaders. State government, federal government, everybody has a role to play. Brother Senator Kimpson, I know you've been passionate about this issue as long as I've known you. And what are state governments? What should they be doing? What are they doing? What are you doing? You can share with us to help expand economic opportunities for Black Americans, particularly Black-owned businesses.
Well, let me first thank the DR, Kurt Walker, for assembling this panel here on this evening. Kurt is really doing the Lord's work, but also the mission, carrying out the mission of our fraternity, and focusing on economics. Oftentimes, we have a social justice agenda, but as Brother Ali said, you can't have that in the absence of an economic agenda. Politics without substance is a symbol without economics. And so also let me thank you, Brother Wade. You've always been a shining beacon of light in DC, and it's brothers like you who serve in a capacity to make real change at a national level. Unfortunately, I read your question, and I don't have much to report with respect to the state of South Carolina. I think that when we look around the 6th district, we have programs within our respective states, but as the statistics show, and y'all have repeated them twice, those programs haven't really created many substantive people in our community with large financial wealth. And we got to change that. The only way we can change that is to elect good people. Now, I get 80% of the vote in Charleston County, much in part of Kurt Walker and the bros licking envelopes and putting up signs. So when I take to the Senate floor to talk about minority businesses and enterprises that we can create from state government, my plea often falls on deaf ears. And when you look at the state of South Carolina, which is dominated by a Republican governor, a Republican Speaker of the House, and a Republican President of the Senate, they ain't interested. They ain't interested in creating Black millionaires or creating people of color and making it even the playing field to get access to capital. So the numbers that you cite are not surprising. When I look at Congress, and I think Brother Coburn will echo this. I spent some time with him most recently last week, and then about 2 weeks prior in Santee. PPP was a dismal failure for Black businesses. Over 90% of the African-American small businesses who applied got denied. And that's not unlike the programs for credit or any other program that deals with funding, providing funding for people of color. So what do we do about it? Now, look, I don't want to make this political, but it is. We got a man that has a plan for the country, and his name is Joe Biden. He has a plan called the Lift Every Voice and Sing plan for Black America. They don't call it a contract for Black America, but it's very, very substantive. And it sets forth the specific line items, much modeled after the Obama-Biden era, where we use the resources of the federal government to inject capital through the state, small and minority business owner entities. We also increase federal procurement capital going out to Black businesses. There's also a call for $100 billion fund to create new housing, affordable housing in our community, much of which our contractors, our African-American contractors, can participate in. And finally, there's a $70 billion plan to inject into historically Black colleges. Now, he followed that up, Joe Biden followed that up by the racial equity, you call it the Build Back Better, advancing racial equity across the American economy. And so I think we start at a federal government by electing a new president. We support brothers like Congressman Clyburn, who have a majority in the House. We got to take back the United States Senate because, as you know, Rick, we can pass a bill in the House, but it gets stopped in the Senate. We're not far away. We got a young man, Jamie Harrison, who my prediction is he will win the U.S. Senate. And those seats are so important when you look at these programs from a state level, because when we get to small states like South Carolina, we got about a $9 billion budget, but an infusion from capital, a fusion of capital from the federal government can support the framework that Brother Henson is working on and Brother Ali are working on. But we gotta have people in place who can make sure that money gets to the people that are most deserving, the people who look like us, who oftentimes are look. Finally, let me just say this. These minority business programs, when they are successful, they're not successful for us. White women have been the largest beneficiaries of the small and minority-owned business enterprises in every state. I don't know of one state that's not the case. And I challenge anybody on this call to prove to me differently. And so we have to really readdress the definition of minority, and that's a constitutional question. But we must do like Maynard Jackson did in Atlanta, much when he was building the Atlanta airport. We must use the tools that we have in government to make sure that money is going to who it's supposed to go to, whether it's in a strong insinuation with the business community of where it's supposed to go to, or holding building permits up until we get some type of racial equity and parity in procurement.
Good. Brother Sim, thank you for that. You know, one of the things, as I was thinking about your response to that, which I believe we really also need to focus on, and David, I want to come to you, but Sim, I'd like to give me a minute. You give us a minute of response to this. It's one thing to elect elected officials who have plans, because everybody has a plan. How do we hold them accountable once they get in office to go back and honor that plan, to invest in Black businesses and all the promises and make sure that they're kept? And just curious, as you are a state senator, how much do you hear from Black voters and Black business owners in particular about accountability and to support you in the work and the agenda that you're trying to advance?
Well, I appreciate the question, Brother Wade, but I disagree with the premise. I don't think everybody has a plan. And what this election has shown us is that if they have a plan, it ain't necessarily for us. And so, first of all, I think it's important that you read the respective campaigns of the respective plans of the campaign, or lack thereof. I would say you have to judge a politician or someone who offers themselves for public service by the company they keep. And if that potential elected official is getting good advice and consent and bantering ideas about from people that then that's generally indication that those people are going to be around him or her when time comes to start enacting some of these plans. Not all the time, but for the most part, when you got folks who have been involved in the struggle, who are knowledgeable about the issues we face in the community surrounding a person during election season, then generally speaking, that person is going to be getting advice and taking guidance from those people that were with him or her on the campaign trail. And then you'll have an opportunity to vote him or her out. But I think that, this election is very critical for us. I don't think we're talking about people that are even closely aligned when you look at the president, the race for president, and quite frankly, all of the US Senate races. I mean, the lines are clearly drawn. And I would just encourage the brothers to look at the plans of the two respective parties and the leaders of those parties and ask yourself, who you would be better off supporting.
David, let me come to you because you and I have had many conversations, whether it's the president campaign or governor, state legislators, or mayors. Where's the opportunity to build a coalition of Black businesses and others, again, to help hold accountable and to continue to advance the conversation once individuals are elected? I know you ran a federal agency, and I don't know how much input you even got. Maybe you can share that in terms of how do we hold, whether it's even policymakers who are responsible to citizens and also to Black businesses around an economic agenda accountable?
Well, yeah, it's a really good question, Rick, and it's a thoughtful question. There's a number of ways, but one of the things that I observed, as you observed as well, that if you're not financing the candidate, it's exceptionally hard to guarantee that that candidate has your agenda in mind. One of the things that we've been very good at as a community is voting. We are now moving, and thanks so much to Barack Obama, we are now becoming more sophisticated in recognizing that writing that check is equally as important. Where the money goes is where the candidate's vote goes, and that's just the hardcore reality. In terms of your other part of your question, in terms of where are the coalition opportunities, I mean, there are many. I mean, honestly, I think, and I don't say this lightly, I think the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the work you're doing there is a vehicle to engage both on the business side and on the coalition building side. There is a need for us to have an agenda that represents the Black business community. We know certain components of that. For example, we know that capital must be a critical part of that. And I'll go back to what Senator Kimpson said, that Biden's Build Back Better plan has those components included. But I also think we need to think in terms of reimagining and imagining business in a different way, reimagining the organizations that we want to engage in. And sometimes we have to think about building new organizations or new entities that fairly reflect the future that we want to have versus the past or the experience we've had in the past. So I think there's multiple opportunities. I think we need to grab the bull by the horns. I think we need to think in terms of what is the new imagination or the new look of the African American business community. We do know that sadly, many of the businesses aren't going to be around by the end of the COVID-19 period. So we have a tremendous opportunity to really, what you say, Rick, reimagine what this community looks like and build policies and procedures that we demand that the political class engage in, but also that we demand that the business community engage in as well, the large corporations, the supply chains, and become more part of that dialogue. One component, for example, is in the growth of international business opportunities. We do not spend enough time talking about the economic opportunity globally for African-American owned businesses. Most people don't know, for example, that there are 28 countries that have defined African diaspora communities. Those countries range from the African countries, which we know about, but also European countries, France and Belgium. In South America, you have over 1.3 million people of African descent in Mexico. You have 1.2 million in Ecuador. You actually have an African diaspora community that we could take advantage of in Russia. And so when you look at the growth of Black-owned businesses and you compare the operating and the competitive environment in the United States compared to what they would have if they focused on the global markets where 95% of the world's consumers live, there are actually greater opportunities outside the United States and a much more level playing field than you may find for many of these businesses in the United States. So it's something we need to talk about and we need to engage on and we need to build around.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, when I was the interim head at the U.S. Department of Commerce and leading trade missions to India and Japan all around the world, you know, I don't want us to lose what David just said. 95% of the world's consumers live outside the United States. The old parable of why did the bank robber rob the bank is where the money was.
That's
the
right.
consumers are outside of the United States. So this reimagination of who we are as Black businesses in America, we have to engage in that process. We need to go where the money is, and the real money is outside of the United States. Farad, one of the other areas that we can talk about policy, and we're leading a whole initiative about addressing these policy issues called the Equality of Opportunity Agenda. And I point all you brothers and others who are on the town hall to uschamber.com. But we're looking to address policies from the state, federal, and local level to help close these inequities in our economy, these gaps. But there is a responsibility of private sector and corporate America. And one of them is around supply chain and diversity. Tell us about what that means in some of your work and maybe best practices at NMSDC, which you were a vice president of. How do we connect more Black businesses to corporate supply chain?
Hey, man, thank you so much, Brother Wade. Let me, if you don't mind, I'd like to just take a small personal privilege to kind of really connect all the conversation in a way that allows for maybe our brothers to understand how businesses developed. And so when you look at the ecosystem, Brother Kimpson, I think you said something so important. When you look at the ecosystem, when federal government has made a decision to make minority business or Black business a priority, they need to look at the things that keep us from being successful. So for example, there's a disadvantaged business enterprise wealth cap, CAP, meaning that you can't have a net worth of over $1.3 million. So you remember the earliest that I told you around number of Black millionaires. Well, a lot of our Black businesses started working with their city governments, their local governments, because they found some fairness, because they had relationships. If it's from whatever the job may have been, if it's providing paper, providing services, providing whatever that may be, most of it started in a local environment. And then they typically move from the local environment to the state environment. And it gets more treacherous there, but still you have these limitations on your net worth. So then you have to go out and say, if I grow greater than this, I fall out of that spectrum of being able to get opportunity. And then I begin to have to compete with the big boys. So you go from playing Division III basketball to Division I, and your center is only 6'5". And so it's, unless it's Dennis Rodman, it doesn't work. And so you start understanding that we need to start making sure that the rules of play allow for us to be successful. And what I'm saying is that, and I'm not challenging you, Brother Kimpson, I just think it's important that we recognize is that as people are laying down plans, that those plans will allow for us not to be capped, but allow for us to grow. Because in the private, now I'm going back to your question, Brother Wade, because in the private sector, they look for capacity, right? So you have to have enough scale and capacity to fulfill their needs. So if you're in the janitorial business, which is a very respectable business, and you're cleaning the banks, you don't just clean the banks in South Carolina. If you're working for Wells Fargo, you got to clean the banks for their whole country. So you have to have scale and width and capital. You don't just work, if you're going to provide accounting services for H&R Block and you don't just get one city, maybe you may get a whole region, which would include Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas. So you have to start building scale. And a lot of that scale is achieved through the ecosystem of how you started your business. As I said earlier, we didn't have a pathway to creating wealth. And wealth allows us to get access to capital, because when your balance sheet and your credit is good, that allows you to get access to more capital. So I think it's important as you get into corporation supply chains, they have moved their requirements. So it's another economic evaluator that adversely affect the community of color, particularly Black businesses, because they're saying that you have to have scale. And if you start looking at one of the things I recognized working at the NMSDC, we certified minority businesses. That was African-American, Latino, Hispanic American, Native American, as well as Asian American. I saw that most of the businesses that we certified, if I may say, and I can't remember if I'm exact, at least 80% of those businesses were below $5 million. Most corporations are looking for companies that are 10, 20, 50, $100 million. So when you're talking about getting into their supply chain, you become a trusted partner. And if UPS and FedEx and IBM and Lenovo and Cisco are going to put you in their supply chain, a lot of our businesses will die from indigestion than starvation. If they give us too much business, we will quickly go out of business than if they give us a little business. So let's looking at how do we make sure that we grow, we're able to go through the right ecosystem to grow so that we can be prepared to play at a Division I level. And that's what I'm really concerned around as we go towards a new administration, is that we help them in their space of really becoming conscious, and companies becoming conscious to really work with Black businesses. Let's make sure they develop the policies so it's possible for us to achieve those successes. And if we don't have the right ingredients for the recipe, I promise you the meal will not be as good as it could be. And we have to start doing that stuff today.
Good, good. Brother Senator Kimpson, I know some of what he talked about, again, as we think about government, trying to think about even on the government contracting side, say just in the state of South Carolina, how do we drive the kinds of reforms that kind of unbundle and get contracts out? I mean, there's a whole conversation that we must have, even around government, when you think about state government and federal government as the largest purchaser in each jurisdiction, federally and state. But any insight on how we can also improve in that particular domain?
Well, I think Ali hit it on the head with respect to making sure the rules work. For example, I'm looking at the certification for an MBE in the state of South Carolina, and it says your personal total net worth cannot exceed $750,000. And so that's your net worth. So if you got a house, that almost wipes you out of being certified as a minority business enterprise in the state of South Carolina. There's something wrong with that. But even more importantly, when I call up the minority business agencies in the state, I can't get data. The state hadn't even staffed these agencies. They got one or two people messing around on DOS. DOS is where we had the disk. And the point of it is I go to the floor of the Senate, which I went. We got $2 billion. North Carolina got twice that amount from COVID, from the CARES Act. And I knew enough to know from the national PPP number, that we needed to do something for Black businesses in the state of South Carolina. So I put up a proviso, and I was prepared to hold the floor all night to try to earmark money for Black businesses. During that discussion, Kurt Brother Walker remembers this because I posted it on my Facebook page. By the way, at Kimpson for South Carolina, at Kimpson for SC, Twitter, and State Senator Marlon Kimpson is my Facebook page. I would encourage all the brothers to join, because what I do is I put these efforts, minority business advocacy, on my Facebook page. But we didn't get the proviso that night, but I got assurances that we're going to get some money when we go back next week for Black businesses. Now, what I have to do on the floor, or before we get to the floor, is craft the rules, because I feel pretty good that I asked for 10 million, I increased it to 20 million, and that's probably still too low, but I didn't have the data because the offices don't have the data. So I don't know how much money we've lost. I'm working to get it by next Tuesday, but Brother Ali, I'd like to talk to you about some of the ideas. So if we get some money in Henson, if we get some money, we want to make sure it goes to the right place. This is not a friendly environment for this conversation, but what we have to do as skilled legislators is hold people accountable and use the rules of parliamentary procedure to block the budget until we get the money. Finally, let me say, I think that if we flip 2 more Senate seats in Charleston, I potentially can become the delegation chairman for Charleston County. We got an international airport in a predominantly Black neighborhood, not one retail concession store in the Charleston International Airport. So one of my first agenda items would be to look at those board members, which the Senate has the privilege of appointing the board members, and see where we need to make adjustments, because I've been having the same conversation since 2014. We need at least a retail store owned by people of color in the Charleston County Airport. So your legislators need to be fighting for those types of agenda items, and you need to be helping them. This brother Henson has a lot of wealth of support, knowledge, and also Ali and you, Rick. We need help to set the rules up so that we can make sure that these programs that are supposed to be designed for us, we're able to take advantage of.
Thank you, Brother Kimpson. Let me remind all of the brothers and guests who are in the town hall, you certainly can submit your questions in the chat room, and we'll move to that in just one moment. And then we want to entertain your questions and keep the conversation going to our designated hour, 8 o'clock. David, Senator Kimpson touched on a word, 4 letters, but that is so important, called data. The reality is, I think we know that of the 2.6 million Black-owned companies across America, most are sole proprietors. They're independent contractors. Tell us more about the importance of data. And we just launched a partnership with American Express, where we're trying to get emergency grants right now to Black businesses. But do we know who the Black businesses are? Do we?
Unfortunately, yeah, Rick. Unfortunately, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Unfortunately, we don't know who the Black businesses are. We don't know the components of them. There have been some incidental studies, but those studies don't even get close to what Senator Kimpson's trying to get to. Data is the king. Data is the game. And unless you have the data, it is almost impossible. It is in fact impossible to really understand and to craft the type of policy that will have both near-term and long-term impact. In fact, the state of California is one example. There's a state law that literally prohibits them from collecting data. And the city of Philadelphia, where they have substantial citywide, government contracts, there is no data that supports the notion that more African-American and other businesses should gain access to these sort of contracts, even though the city is majority Black. And that plays out all across the nation. It is a travesty. And if there's nothing else that we do, we need to get our heads around an agenda item that speaks specifically to the need for data, short-term, midterm, long-term, because without it, there's no way to create viable policies.
Yes. I want to ask Brother Ali, and then we'll move to questions and answers, because one of the things that we shouldn't leave off this agenda is how do we also inspire young entrepreneurs? We've established a whole new project with historically Black colleges and other minority serving institutions to inspire more innovators and entrepreneurs to go into business. If you think about our education model, is oftentimes, I'm dating myself, but I remember my grandmother saying, you need to go to college to get a good job. And a good job was a state government job. That's probably how most colleges and universities teach, to prepare you for the workforce. How do we think about ways to inspire students to think entrepreneurial while they're in college, to creating a business, to transfer their ingenuity into entrepreneurship? Brother Ali, you started a business. This is not your first time in the rodeo, but what are your thoughts on how do we work with young people? Because we got a lot of young brothers on college campuses now to think about creating and owning their own businesses.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Brother Wade. And I am blessed that my mom was an entrepreneur, and so was my father. So I got a chance to kind of see what it took to be an entrepreneur from a gutsy level, with the grit that you have to have, the grit and the grind. But the truth of the matter, I think, I've got 2 kids that finished college and 2 more that are going, is that, I remind them that what they're looking for in college is not necessarily where they're going to be. I mean, just think, I'm dating myself. When I was in college, there was no Google, there was no Facebook, there was no Amazon, there was no, all these companies that are now the biggest companies in the world, Apple, and those companies were not there when I graduated, right? We had the traditional companies, and those companies now are not, they're looking for entrepreneurial thinkers. They're looking for the thought, the knowledge economy. They want you to be entrepreneurial, even if you're not entrepreneurial in working in their companies, because they get the best outcome there. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is that we would like, it hurts me to see youth now who say they're on their grind and they're trying to get it, but they haven't been taught the tools to get what they need to get. And we need to start circling them up and start teaching them what does it take to be successful as an entrepreneur, because the truth is that most wealthy people in our world are entrepreneurs. I was doing a speech for a bunch of young brothers and kids, and I was telling them that most owners of football teams and basketball teams, this is their second or third job. Their team is an entrepreneurial adventure. We need to start helping our youth understand how entrepreneurship is interwoven into our society. So when they see doctors and lawyers and they start seeing business owners, they start understanding that the conditions that they have to work with inside as an entrepreneur will help them to be best and grow. So it's really creating the environment to start teaching our youth around entrepreneurship.
Good. Brother Johnson, with that said, I believe we may have some questions. Brother Ken Johnson, our 6th District Technology Chairman, we'll turn it over to you for any questions that the panel might respond to.
Okay, thank you, Brother Wade. We've got 8 questions. I'll try to take a random sampling of the questions to try to cover as many of the brothers that submitted them as possible. The very first question: what is the panelists' take on the recent merger of 2 Black banks, Broadway and Federal Bank and City First Bank, and the roles they could play in Black-owned business, International OPPF Ways and Means? Okay, that's from the International OPPF Ways and Means Chair.
So the question is about the David. You want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take that. I've actually looked at that deal. There are going to be some substantial values. First, most Black banks are small, very, very small in terms of their deposit bases. If you added up all the Black-owned banks, in fact, all the minority-owned banks, you would not have a middle market majority-owned bank. That's how small they are. So this is directionally correct to get banks that are bigger with more size and scale They will be able to provide a broader platform of lending products and services to Black banks. One of the challenges with this merger, however, is that, you know, when you look at the structure of it, they actually have a nonprofit structure, so they're not actually designed as a banking entity to maximize profitability. So that's something they're going to have to deal with. But one of the real benefits that's going to come from this merger is now there are other Black banks that are looking at merging or acquiring capital so they can compete. The more $1 billion in assets and higher Black-owned banks we get, the stronger our financial community will be, the easier it will be for African-American owned companies to acquire the capital they need to grow and expand.
Thank you. Next question.
Okay, here's a follow-on to that. How effective can Black-owned controlled federal credit unions play a major role for Native Black Americans?
Brother Farad, you like to answer that, or we go to David or Senator Kimpson? Either one.
Yeah, I think this is, and it's going to really edify some of the comments that we got from David, is that, you know, simply we have to deposit money in these banks for them to have the capital to lend. And so as they start merging and coming together, banks, most Black banks are CDFI, or community development financial institutions. And a lot of our credit unions are also CDIs, community development financial institutions. So we need to have an intentional effort to make sure that we provide them with the deposit relationships so they can have the money to lend to the community. And so organizing our credit unions in a way that they can start coalescing an intentionality for not being competitive. There's a way that we can do cooperation, right? We can cooperate and still compete in a way that allow for us to be successful. So we should start aligning these organizations so that we can cooperate to compete, so that we can do best for our community and not just compete, because that takes actually assets away from our people.
Yeah, I would add to that simply, which is an excellent point. I would add to that simply by saying that, you know, within every industry sector, there's typically a Black association, and some sectors, for example, the Black construction community, may be stronger than other sectors. So one of the things that we have to do is really look at these organizational structures that currently exist. And as Rick pointed out earlier, reimagine these structures not to provide a voice for the members of that industry sector to come together, but to provide support in terms of engaging the financial community on behalf of its members much more aggressively than they do now. If we had stronger Black-owned banks, we could literally change, you know, Black unemployment. We could change everything that goes on in the Black community that we don't like. If you want to get a good history lesson, you don't need to look very much further than, you know, the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the impact that the banking system, the Black banking system, Black depositors had on the growth of that business community. So we have examples of where we can be successful just working more closely together. So I certainly want to second Brother Ali's point about working together and collaborating while we compete.
Rick, if I could.
The Black Wall Street's in Durham, North Carolina. Tulsa was different, just to, you know, protect the brothers.
Brother Kimpson.
Very well.
We had a bit of good news recently in South Carolina. PayPal put in $50 million into what was South Carolina Community Bank. Now it's named Optus, and that is a Black-owned bank. Tony Grant works, brother Tony Grant works in some capacity with Optus, but that's the kind of social conscious investment that we need to be looking for and demanding from good corporate, fiscally responsible corporations. Oftentimes we get excited about $1 million gift to some organization, but what we really ought to be looking for are African-American board members on Fortune 500 companies and also companies who are not just making a philanthropic gift to a social organization, but making an investment into the infrastructure of our ecosystem, like an investment in our bank or an investment in housing or some type of investment with Black money managers. That quite frankly is one of the things that is not on the radar. When you look at the public pension plans across the country, they have trillions of dollars in assets collectively. I mean, think about CalPERS, CalSTRS, state of South Carolina. And if you look at the jobs of the people who could make contributions to the employment benefit plans and the state, that money is largely managed by people who do not look like us. If we can somehow figure out a way, not only with the state pension plans, but also the federal government pension plan, to have Black or people of color money managers, that would give us some opportunities to explore some non-traditional ways of financing our corporations, our entrepreneurs in private equity transactions.
I just add one more point to that, Rick. We also should not overlook government. You know, the state governments in every state use the banking system for their operations. They flow billions of dollars every year through the banks. If there's a Black-owned bank within your state, the state legislators have to commit themselves to making sure that that bank participates in the state cash flows or local cash flows that the government has. It's an overlooked economic opportunity, but all the state governments use the local banking system as a part of their operations, and Black banks need to be a part of that.
And if I could just add to this, and I think it's important that when we listen to Brother Kimpson and hear what David is saying, is that we start reimagining the rules of 5 and 10% utilization. I'm one that says, I mean, you were talking about, 95% of the marketplace is outside of the country. I think it's bad for us to be limited on net worth and then be limited on 10% of the business. You create a ongoing wealth problem in the community of color by continuing to put down putting these rules that you're saying is to help there to be more participation, but they limit your ability to gain wealth. And until we get to be wealth providers, we can't really fund the political system, fund the ecosystem, fund the jobs and training, fund the things like we see other corporations do. And we don't need to have 35 Black millionaires. We need to have millions of Black millionaires to really make the impact in our country so they can work throughout the whole industry.
And our goal, Brother Ali, is to create more billionaires like you. Next question.
Send me a check.
Okay, this is going to go to Brother Kimpson. Brother Kimpson, I'm going to add 2 questions since they're both directed specifically at you. It says, when you say the candidate vote goes where the money comes from, how does that affect small check writers? And then the other question was, can you appoint a small business committee in your district and maybe statewide to address the issues you talked about?
Okay, well, I think Brother Henson said made the first comment, but I agree with Brother Henson. Oftentimes, candidates are in the room with large donors, and certainly when a candidate is spending his or her time just by the natural demands that candidates have on their schedule, they have to spend time with people who write larger checks because they have certain responsibilities when running a campaign. I don't know if you've looked at how much TV time costs. You can't win a statewide campaign unless you're on TV. What happened here in South Carolina is unprecedented. Jamie Harrison has done a tremendous job. He's raised more money than any other candidate in South Carolina's history, a Black man from Orangeburg. But he spends a lot of his time, he has to spend committing time to call in those large donors. And no doubt the large donors, you have to spend time with them. Now, what's happening differently, and I think brother will agree with me, is that these $100 donations now with crowdfunding, that's a testament to how President Barack Obama used the internet and other technological advances to catapult his candidacy, because there were many of those virtual events, and those people bundle that money and they can have an agenda as well. So money is definitely still alive and well in politics, and it's really a necessity. It's an unfortunate part of running a campaign. If you go into Congress, you almost the day you get sworn in, you got to start raising money for your next campaign, because the next campaign is in 2 years. So I don't know if that answers the question. There was a second question, but I don't recall.
It was about the idea of a small business committee or council to help advise you and the state on these issues.
Yeah, well, look, I solicit thoughts through the channels, my Twitter page and my Facebook page, and I have legal counsel through the South Carolina Senate. But what I find, and this is no different than any other state, unfortunately, we have too many conservative judges that have been appointed in the federal judiciary. And why that's important is because when you look at the definition of minority, in order to designate dollars, first of all, you can't put a mandate. You can, unless you're the federal government for some reason, but at the state level, you have to have a goal. And if you do put a mandate in a state procurement, you have to prove that the availability of contractors for that specific procurement item, they're more, the number is large. In other words, there has to be an available market for that particular procurement. And you have to prove that that group has been historically overlooked and disadvantaged. Now, proving the latter isn't necessarily a problem, but proving the former sometimes present complications. So when you start to develop the procurement, it becomes a constitutional question. Is it constitutional to designate in a procurement RFP that a certain amount is going to African American as opposed to the overall word of minority? And the legal, particularly in the Fourth Circuit, where North Carolina and South Carolina cases are precedent, it provides enormous challenges because they have all but basically stricken our ability to really narrowly focus the procurement based on the desires that collectively this group would have. And I'm sure Ali and Henson know a lot more about that as they've encountered this challenge at the state level.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Brother Johnson, before you go to the next question, and we'll take a couple more. Brother Henson, I'm respectful of your time.
Thank you.
Jump off. Thank you so much for joining us and bringing your perspective, particularly from the Minority Business Development Agency. Any last closing thoughts that you like to offer in this town hall, and we'll let you go.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rick. And look, thanks everyone for having me here. This is the type of conversation that we need to have. It's forward thinking, it's imaginative. And I would just encourage all of you. First, I want to, send a blessing to all of you and your families during this very difficult time. We all are suffering, or we know someone that's suffering. So may God bless you and keep you. And I also want you to take this opportunity during this time to reimagine your own lives, to reimagine your own businesses, ask questions, solicit support. We're here to help. I'm certainly here to help you. Rick knows, Rick and I are very good friends. And if there's anything I can do to help you on your way, please let me know. I'd be glad to do it. So again, thanks so much. Rick, for leading this call. You're doing a great job, and thanks all of you for having me. And have a good night.
Thank you, Brother Ensign. Brother Johnson, maybe we can take a couple more. I think we'll go. I believe Brother DR to 8:15. I want to be respectful of brothers' families and time. So maybe we can take 2 or 3 more.
Okay. The next question. As the chairman of International Economic / Marketing Development Committee for Omega Psi Phi, what program would you like to see our committee undertake to help support this initiative throughout Omega? Also, what is your opinions about African-American businesses joining forces to be able to have a larger reach and scale more?
Well, I'd like to take a stab at that, or at least give an observation. And Brother DR and I have had this conversation. I believe that Omega could create a collective voice in the network of brothers who are business owners within our own fraternity. I know we probably have a directory, but how do we continue to socialize and engage that? How do we make sure that the access that I have across corporate America, we represent 3 million companies. I love to know who the brothers in Omega are, who have businesses, so we can, and I think Brother Ali would agree, connect them with corporate supply chains. So, one of the things we talked about earlier is data. Who are our brothers within our own fraternity who have businesses, and also who are these aspiring young entrepreneurs and innovators, not to leave out our undergraduate brothers. And so creating that ecosystem would be extremely valuable, not just for domestic reasons, but for global opportunities as well. So I think that would be very valuable to me. I don't know if Brother Ali or Senator Kimpson may want to add anything to that.
I agree.
All right. And there was a second part of the question, Brother Johnson, I think.
Yep. The second part of the question is also, what is your opinions about African-American businesses joining forces to be able to have a larger reach and scale more?
Well, I think we touched on that earlier. The opportunity is now. I know that these are tough times, but the more that we can create a collective voice, the better. I built a whole coalition, including the various Black business organizations, the U.S. Black Chamber, the National Black Chamber, Walker's Legacy, which is a premier national Black business organization focused on women, Black women business owners, the National Business League, Dr. Ken Harris, who is a brother who has reconstituted the first business organization ever created by Booker T. Washington. So we're creating this coalition. And, and the more we can expand and grow this, the more opportunity that we can create to not only advance policy and change, but also to connect with companies. So the value of a collective voice in a coalition is extremely important and extremely powerful. And I think working together, we can get there. But this could actually start with Omega. I remember when we were doing the CARES Act funding, PPP, I convened the Divine Nine, the heads of all of the organizations, to talk about how we can make sure that this information cascades down to brothers and sorority sisters who own companies. So we can start just within Omega in our collective Greek family to create a coalition would be powerful, because we are that talented 10th, 20th, 30th, 40th in all of these communities when you think about it. So that's not a bad place to start, with our own fraternities and sororities, to create that collective platform.
Yeah, I would only add to that there's an opportunity for us to, as Dave would say, reimagine partnerships. So we need to start being open to partnerships, to partner with other businesses that are Black owned or minority owned or differently, so that we can recognize that there may be a scale and size that we may be limited to in our community. But if we have partnerships across the country, that they could be helpful. The Asian population does a great job of this in making sure they stay connected around industries in which they want to be a part of. They use that experience to teach other people around how to build out. So we could do that within our community in a way I think that could advance Omega and all the Panhandle by coming together and recognizing that if you have a business that's thriving in Charleston, then you got another business that's thriving in Columbia. Imagine if those two got together, they could take over the whole state. But if they just stay in their spaces, they could just manage in that, maybe just in those spaces.
All right, Brother Johnson, any more questions?
Yep, we've got more questions, but a good one to talk about our youth. From the International Youth Leadership Conference Vice Chair, it says, for our beloved fraternity, what are some workshops and resources we can offer our youth?
Yeah, I think it's this is where I think we should really start using our best practices in the fraternity, where we can start teaching our youth around entrepreneurship, and then maybe not just do it at one of the chapters, but like bring all of the chapters together, right? So I think it should be less around chapter which chapters are better than the other chapters, like bring all of our chapters together and look at that mind share, because that mind share could help us to really do a better job in helping our youth everywhere. The world is so connected, right? I mean, before, again, I'm as old as Rick, or maybe not as old as Rick, but before we had to do everything through mail and phone, but these young adults have relationships all over the world. I mean, they playing video games with people all over the world. So we can start doing that with our youth in our cities and our states and in our district. And we can format an entrepreneurship academy that can be shared with all the chapters and do it everywhere. That can maybe be something that could help advance. And it also will connect us to our talents in our community, because then if we see a young brother or sister, particularly the brothers that is bright in the community in an area, it should not be hard for us to send him from Charleston, South Carolina, to Charlotte, North Carolina, to Durham, North Carolina, back to Columbia, and working inside of the network because of relationships. I mean, how many brothers do we know that have technology companies or talented in technology? How many brothers do we know that are in construction and talented in construction? How many brothers do we know that are in any business? I mean, I think being a pastor is like a CEO because they run all the things. How do we make sure that we connect the connective tissue in our fraternity to build our community, and not do it by one chapter or another chapter, but unite the chapters for this effort?
Yeah, Brother Ali, and I would even go further. How do we think about, I mean, we're international. I mean, what's the connective tissue with our brothers who live abroad? I'm working with the country in the Middle East about creating and investing in a whole immersion program for young Black entrepreneurs. And so we need to think about India, and yes, think about the continent of Africa, but China and all these other places where we have brothers. And in the days of technology, we can do this all day long. But exposing these young people to the world, even beyond, again, America, where 95% of the consumers and the world looks like us. But we can socialize this within our own fraternity because we're an international organization, but it means reimagining who we are and how we engage each other. Brother Johnson?
Okay, here's one going up to real estate. It says, how does the panelists view real estate development, residential and commercial, playing an important factor for Native Black Americans?
I think this is a very important question. This may go back to Brother Kimpson, is how I think there's this idea of dealing with the sense around rebuilding our communities. I think your Senator Tim Scott tried to do opportunity zones, which I think is going to make white people wealthy, not necessarily Black people wealthy, because it's going to come into our communities. But how do we make sure we participate rebuilding in our communities? Land is a special asset that is really finite. And I think it's important that we figure out ways to own real estate and build out real estate for our homes, our schools, and our businesses. When you look at some of the biggest millionaires in our country, they have a large portion of their portfolio in real estate. A lot of that's changed because of COVID, but I believe that real estate development is critical to our community development. Otherwise, other people who don't have interest in our community will reinvest and develop our communities without a sense of stability in our communities. And without that sense of stability, it makes it more unaffordable for us to be in our spaces. It makes it inability to have housing and to gain employment. So I think it's critical that we get behind brothers and sisters who are in real estate development.
I would echo those thoughts. In this COVID pandemic we're living in, one of the emphasis of the CARES Act funding, and also, quite frankly, when you look at, I know at least with respect to Vice President Biden, his $100 billion affordable housing fund, is housing. Not just for high density neighborhoods, but the whole idea of having a multi-generational house where it's packed with so many people is anti-social distance. And so as we retool our budgets, you're going to look at the state government and you see a lot of money going to state housing authorities, not only for COVID reasons, but also the fact that, as Brother Ali stated, our neighborhoods are becoming gentrified and the working class people don't have a place to live anymore. And so they're commuting. For Charleston, people live in Orangeburg and they get stuck on 26, so they're late for work. And those who drive to work got to spend half the paycheck on the parking. And so it makes sense for government to invest in housing to keep people appropriately social distance, but also to get employees who work in the cities and work in other highly attractive areas to work sooner. Now, what we have to do at a local level is ensure that those development permits require affordable housing. So I've offered what they call inclusionary zoning, which no new building permit will be approved in the state of South Carolina. Now, this is my thought. I hadn't gotten this bill passed yet, but unless there is a designated percentage for affordable housing, or you pay an in lieu fee to the state housing authority to be used for affordable housing. And so those types of creative, innovative ways. Now, how do we get that money to the developer? Well, we got to make sure that the development, particularly if it's government spending, includes people of color in the contract. And my suggestion on the opportunity zones is, look, the opportunity zone is the law. There's nothing we can do to change it right now. And we got to figure out how we leverage that law to include people that look like us. And one of the ways to do that is if you have Black city councils, Black county councils, is you work with the developers to ensure that this private equity fund coming out of New York is inclusive in the hiring the developers for that community. Otherwise, you're right, Brother Ali, you got a guy that's purely driven based on the market return of flipping that property, and he's gone. What about the early childhood education center? What about the grocery store in the food desert? What about the having Johnson Construction set up, who makes a donation to Royal Baptist Missionary Church? And so you got to have local governmental officials in tune with what is happening in the community, and not just bending over backwards, hooking and bucking for any particular person coming with a paycheck. But that takes engagement, that takes foresight, and we got to do a better job at making sure whatever law is passed, that it works for us.
Thank you. Why don't we end with the question, Brother Johnson? Maybe if there are other questions, that I'm sure if you can circulate those questions to us as a panel, as a group, we'll be happy to answer them. But I do want to be respectful of time. So why don't we, Brother Ali, Brother Kimpson, any closing thoughts before and then I'll make a closing comment, and we'll turn it back over to our distinguished leader, district representative. Brother Ali, any final closing thought?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Brother Wade, Brother Kimpson, Brother DR, and Brother Johnson for having us be a part of this important conversation. I think we spend a lot of time in our community dealing with issues that are right in front of us, if it's healthcare, if it's housing, or education in our schools. But I do believe economic empowers a lot of that. And so, speaking as a child of a parent who, once he got a job, it changed the whole trajectory of a family and even generations to come, that we need to start looking for economic justice. So as we start, I would challenge us as a fraternity, as we start looking for ways to socially deal with unrest or bad practices, that we also start developing economic development plans. Even that means helping a brother inside of our fraternity, helping to build a community awareness, teaching people about financial impact, debt management, because all those things cripple us as a community and as individuals. And so we can learn how to better manage our debt, be able to make investments, better build businesses, better help our brothers in investment, then we can actually build a community from within. So I know that sounds lawfully, but Nelson Mandela said everything is hard until it's done. So if we can start having some kind of plan to start focusing on economic justice as key to our social justice, I think the empowerment would be greater. There'll be some exponential to it, but I am still honored and privileged, and thank you, Brother Wade, for calling me today and asking me to participate.
Thank you. Thank you. Brother Kimpson?
I want to thank you, Brother Wade, for spearheading what I think is a great program. Brother Walker, one thing we might consider doing is having, a monthly event like this to sort of check in and provide information to the brothers on respective projects and economic development. As I mentioned earlier, politics without economics is a symbol without substance. And we have to demand of our elected officials that they are in tune to these issues. We work for you. There are too many examples of opportunities of new business that have gone to our communities where, again, we were short-sighted. We looked at the sheetrock contract or the janitorial service contract, and those are great things. But what we didn't do is negotiate the going concerns or the business activity that will result in the supplier chain, because once the brick is laid, that project is done. What we're looking for is a going concern to tap into the revenue stream where we can have our African-American businesses participate, because in most situations, those businesses that moved in our communities were lured with state dollars. In the case of Boeing, we gave in excess of $100 million. Now, Boeing has been, in my view, a good corporate citizen. We used to have a president of Boeing here in North Charleston, Joan Robinson Berry, who did a great job at making sure that African Americans were at the table. And we got to make sure that when we put up large incentives, there's I believe they call it a ROI or ROE, return on investment or equity. And that's what you want to look at, particularly in the African American community. So I would encourage y'all to keep the faith, keep strong. And I'm going to leave you with just 5 words. Get your ass out to vote. Get your ass out to vote. Our humanity is at stake. Our livelihood is at stake. Our existence is at stake. This election could not be bigger. So get your ass out to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Kimpson. Well said. Listen, I want to thank you again, Brother DR, all of the brothers and guests and others who joined for this town hall. As I started this conversation early, and I think we can all attest to this, You know, whether we feel like this is a different moment in our history and time, however you feel about this, it is a time, it's a moment in time that we have to transform from just conversation to real action. You know, our building here at the chamber is located at Lafayette Square across from the White House. And I witnessed the protests, and we all have witnessed these protests across the country. And we got to know at its core, yes, it is about the murder of George Floyd and the killing of Breonna and Aubrey and Senator Kimpson. You know, this is the anniversary year of the unfortunate Charleston massacre, where our friend Clemente Pinckney and other churchgoers. Racial inequality is real in America. It's real. But as we propose strategies forward and solutions forward, it's not just civil rights and voting rights, it is also economic opportunity. And at its core, at the core of a lot of these voices that are being unheard that we're hearing now, is this lack of economic mobility. People are stuck in communities without decent jobs, without the ability to climb the economic ladder and basically provide for themselves and their families. We can create an above ground economy. There won't be the need for an underground economy where everybody has a chance to aspire to this promise or this dream or whatever you call it that America has delivered to us, but yet has not been realized. So, Brother DR, thank you for convening this dialogue. I agree with Senator Kimpson. Maybe we can continue the dialogue and move from dialogue to action. At the end of the day, that's what matters the most. Thank you to the panelists and David Henson in his absence for being a part of this town hall. Brother DR.
Yes, man. I want to just thank you, gentlemen, brothers, for convening an excellent program. I got a page full of notes, and then I plan to watch this recording and break some of this stuff down that you discussed tonight, because that's what we had to do. We got to do our homework, and we have to examine and look at ways we can actually implement many of the ideas and strategies that you discussed tonight, especially that key word of entrepreneurship and getting our young brothers an opportunity to engage themselves in learning business skills and putting them into practice. And Brother Rick Wade has already talked with us early on with some possibilities to do that, just specifically for our undergraduate brothers. I want to stop real quick and recognize a couple of our, several of our.
You hit mute.
Brother Walker went to mute.
All right, I think I get froze real quick by a phone call. Second District Representative Kelvin Mpofo, who was on the call. Also, Third District Representative Conrado Morgan. Brother Ken Johnson, is Brother First Vice Grand Bosselist Ricky Lewis still on the call?
No, sir.
Okay, but I want to thank him. He was on the call for a time, and if he was still on, I just wanted to give him a chance to say something. But I want to thank everybody for their participation tonight. And again, brothers, we're going to do our best to do what we are charged to do in terms of uplifting our brothers, and also being our brother's keeper, and also just looking into ways that we can replicate and institute these plans of empowerment. And so, brothers, thank you so much for being diligent and patient tonight, and not thinking it robbery to give us this hour and a half tonight. So thank you again, brothers. I want to let us close on a word of prayer with our chaplain, Brother Kimpson, Brother Ali, Brother Wade. Thank you so much. Brother Chaplain.
Brother Alexander's coming on now. Brother Alexander, you should unmute yourself. You should be live.
Thank you. Bow your heads, brothers. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the completion of this informative and motivating economic town hall. Help us to empower ourselves with this wealth of knowledge dispensed to us by this panel of experts. Help the Black community, help the brothers, help us all, Lord, to achieve greater wealth and leave a legacy for our coming generations. Bless us all. Keep us free from the coronavirus until we meet again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 And lastly, we got Brother Ben Crump on Thursday night, 7 o'clock. He's going to be talking about social empowerment from that angle. So be tuning in with us on Thursday night, 7 o'clock. Thank you, brothers.
Thank you,
Okay.
brother.
Brother Wade, check your email. I sent you those questions, okay?
Thank you, bro.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Brother King.